That will take all Sunday school, perhaps. But instead of a prayer, I wanted to share some thoughts from Psalm 119 in lieu of a prayer, reading Scripture. The psalmist says, "Be good to your servant while I live, that I may obey your word. Open my eyes that I may see wonderful things in your law. I am a stranger on earth. Do not hide your commands from me. My soul is consumed with longing for your laws at all times. You rebuke the arrogant. You are accursed those who stray from your commands. Remove from me their scorn and their contempt, for I keep your statutes. Though rulers sit together and slander me, your servant will meditate on your decrees. Your statutes are my delight.
What's wrong?
They are my counsel."
It sounds loud to me.
So that really sets the stage. That was one of the verses in my Bible reading this morning, and I thought I would share that with you.
Is that too loud?
So here's where we're going to pick up. These are a few writings from these two books that are very appropriate.
My hearing aids.
And what I'm going to do is read a few paragraphs from one, and in the midst of that, I'm going to go back to the earlier book and read a paragraph or so from it. So when we think about Sinai, we think about God's covenant, and then we think of the concept of constitutions, which constitutions are covenants of the people. And so Oskinus is going to get into this in quite a detailed way, which I'm not going to read the whole book to you. But in the section, "Set Free to Live Free Together," that's the name of the chapter, in the section, "The Shrinking of the Constitution," he writes, "The truth is that the covenantal vision of Exodus holds the promise of the greatest trust, freedom, and relational richness found in any social and political system in history, but it carries requirements." So you remember in the last several lessons we talked about ordered freedom. Freedom doesn't mean we do anything we want. Freedom means we have responsibility. I'm jumping forward a few sections because he ties many of these things to the American Constitution, Revolution, etc. And I'm kind of jumping specifically to Exodus and Sinai. In the section, "The Uniqueness of Sinai," he says the covenant at Sinai is unique. It represents the central founding event for the Jewish people, just as the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus do for Christians. Three things that Eleazar, which is a scholar, argued set Sinai covenant apart from all the other covenants at the time. Let me pause just a second. I've got to be real diligent with my time this morning. Eleazar is a great scholar. Me and my colleague, Dr. Caleb Fisher at Liberty, this is maybe 14 years ago, we crafted a theory, a model called covenantal empowerment. And some of that's based on Eleazar's work, Rabbi Sachs' work, and others. So you'll hear, now these books are written in the last few years, so you'll hear some of these names, and that's people in that discipline of writing, which me and Dr. Fisher have spent a long time writing and publishing in too. So these are the things, the three unique things of the Sinai covenant that really distinguish it. First, God himself was a partner to the covenant. We've covered that in Sunday school already quite a bit. But listen to this. At Sinai, God, the creator of the universe and the sovereign king, bound himself as a partner to the subordinate king, the people of Israel. Significantly, as we saw in the Great Revelation, which is an earlier chapter of this book, the notion of divine self-limitation entered at that point. So God, who is not restricted, is the only self-sufficient, and really completely other than his creation, became self-limited at a point, and from then on, God, is in covenant with people for particular reasons. So this is a very unique thing. Second, the covenant was with the entire nation or people of Israel. It was a covenant made with them as a people. So the account insisted twice in Exodus, and then it's also referred to in Deuteronomy, that the covenant of God at Sinai is one that all of the people participated collectively in agreement. It prefigures the celebrated formation of the American Constitution in the phrase, "we the people." The covenant was not a social contract forged out of multiple people, and the Jewish people who were there, it was not with the leadership, but the covenant was with all of the people. So at Sinai, men, women, children, everyone born and able to respond said, "We agree," or "we will obey." And Michael Walzer says the agreement was wholesale. All the people accepted all the laws. And as a result, an almost complete or full democracy in a certain way was born. This is very different than the contrast of other suzerainty agreements where there's major and minor parties. These are the known agreements that we have today contractually, whether in governments or in private setting. So there's not a top-down government in this way that God's creating. God himself is joining with the people. And in that way, it's fantastically unique. It far, and I'm just paraphrasing a lot of the rest of this chapter, it far is superior and predates any Athenian model, which the Athenians, again, our republic and democratic models stem from that part of antiquity. What's the heart of humanness in this? Covenanting is foundational for a triangle of relationships that are themselves foundational for good life and good society. First, faith in God. Second, marriage between a man and woman as the core of family life and the generator of new life and future generations. And third, membership in a community or citizenship like in a nation. So what covenanting does in each case is it's making a promise that fosters trust and trustworthiness and thus freedom and responsibility. As such, covenanting is an expression of freedom rather than coercion or faith, and it empowers more freedom in return. Rabbi Sachs notes, and this is key, so listen carefully here, covenant is the decision to make love, not power, wealth, or force majeure the generative principle of life. Thus, in the principle, covenant can replace self-interest, power, and dominance with liberty, love, and loyalty, though only if the covenanters, those in the covenant, remain true to the promise. So Sinai's enduring contribution, the central point of covenanting, is powerful and suggestive in and of itself, but growing out of it are 3 points that are very momentous in shaping social and political life in Israel. So, and not only Israel, this shapes covenants and agreements down through the ages. And he refers here, I explored this theme in the first chapter of Last Call to Liberty. Now, I'm not reading you the first chapter of this book either, because it's 5 minutes till 10. Go, Shultz, you can do it. Okay. And I usually walk when I read, it'll start warming if I go too far. Okay, so I'm only reading one paragraph. And this is Sinai before Athens in the chapter entitled, Do You Know Where Your Freedom Comes From? At the heart of Exodus, the story is a template for society, for human personhood, for freedom, for highly practical ways. Liberty more than liberation, rule of law, the consent of the governed, the responsibility of rights, separation of powers, the notion of prophetic critique and social criticism, transformative servant leadership, the ethics of responsibility, the primacy of the person over the political, and all such ideas are more than a legacy tied directly from Exodus. And their effect was to provide a massive boost for the ancient liberties of the English, which again we know the English would have constitutions before America would form its constitution, which is quite different. And I teach that in history and government all the time. But we think of Sinai, the covenant at Sinai, at the heart of it is the Exodus story. That impacts America and England, I'm paraphrasing a bit here too, and not only their constitution, but later our constitution, and in that process, our revolution versus the secular French Revolution, which is much of the argument of this entire book. So the classical categories of, now this point is why I'm reading, why I brought this book. I would venture to guess most everyone in here has never thought of this idea before. And I'm only saying it because I had never thought of it, and I've read like many thousands of books. You guys might have, in fact, after I read this, I'm going to ask how many people have ever thought of this before. The classical categories of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy are not the only way to classify societies. A different and helpful perspective emerges if societies are classified according to their founding rather than their type of government. Say that last part of that sentence again. A better or maybe more holistic, complete way to think of societies is not in their form of government, but in their founding type. Okay, who's ever thought of that before? Okay, tell me about it. Okay, golly, man, I was just waiting. I was so excited because I was like, golly, I've got to know. I'm curious beyond curious. So if someone's thought of that before, so let me explain just in 1 minute. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, here's what it means. It's easy for us to think of social contracts, give and take. I'll put a little here because I'm going to have to expense it later. That's one way that humanity thinks, and even how governments work, how power works. The covenant in Sinai, it is not going to work that way. In fact, the first commandment is going to show us why. I've got about 4 or 5 more minutes to finish my reading here. So let's continue. He says there's 3 things, which I'm going to only point to 2 of them for time's sake. Sinai's enduring contribution. Of these contributions that are rather momentous, they flow out of the point of covenanting. First, I'm going to read a couple paragraphs here, so just stay with me. First point, the covenant was a matter of freely chosen consent. Now, we talked about that already. And there's 3 separate times the Jewish people were asked for their response. And this is Exodus 19, 8, 24:3, and 24:7, which we won't turn to. But these 3 times, they responded and answered together collectively, all of them. And I'm quoting, "All the Lord has spoken, we will do." And they answered with one voice. In other words, the people ratified the covenant voluntarily. There are 3 simple words, "Here I am," which recur repeatedly in the Bible. Abraham, Jacob, Moses, Samuel. If you've listened to any Charlie Kirk interviews or what his wife said in the fantastic speech that she gave at his memorial, what were the words that he said that are pretty daunting or that any of us could say? As we respond to God and we say, "Here I am," that phrase is unique and very important. This phrase expresses the humility, willingness, readiness of the individual who they know God and they desire to follow God. The freely chosen consent of Sinai is a covenant in collective and momentous ways. Rabbi Sachs underscores the profundity of what was happening. And listen, when I put asterisks, we really have to pay attention to what's said here. The far-reaching principle is articulated for the first time. There is no legitimate government without the consent of the governed, even if the governor is creator of heaven and earth. Now, that's not saying God can't rule all that He's made. God already did rule all that He made. God already was, God already would, and in a certain sense to God, He already did rule everything in all of time and space. He's already done that. But He entered into, uniquely and voluntarily, He came to and entered into a covenant with Israel that they acquiesced or they consented to. And so, listen to this comparison. God is not a transcendental equivalent of Pharaoh. The Commonwealth He invites the Israelites to join with Him is creating not one where He, through power, rules, even though the power is of heaven itself. So from then on, Sachs is going to use what the Jewish sages use, and if we looked at Messianic writings and different rabbis and things, you hear this phrase much in their writing. They believe that an agreement must be free to be binding. So the Torah 613 times specifically commands, and there's no Hebrew word for the word obey. And I think this has also been covered, Rusty's covered it or I've covered it before. more than once. So the nearest word that we have to the Hebrew word for obey is shema, which means listen. Best translated, it means hearken, heed, pay attention. The meaning of shema, which was also in Psalm 119 that I just read to you. So when it says obey the commandments of God, that's an English word. It means listen, hearken, pay attention to, carefully consider, and respond to it appropriately. And so it's not like, and I'm paraphrasing for time, this is not like Islam says submit. That's not the same thing. Because Islam commanding submission, the will's not involved. As many writers are going to say. They're like, well, there's, in Africa or some of these countries, there's tens of thousands of people coming to Islam. What's happening? Well, in a sense, with the boot on the neck, we kill you if you don't acquiesce. People are just choosing not to die, so they're submitting. And in error, and I'm not wondering, I am wondering, in error at times, not Christianity, but religion in the name of Christianity has done the same thing in inquisitions and inquests to force people to agree. That's not covenant. That's not what's happening at Sinai. So people are bound because they're free to choose and free to accept. The second, and this is my final reading. Okay, I got 2 minutes. I'm doing good. Second, the covenant was a matter of a mutually binding moral pledge. And last week I asked you, is morality something that we create or something we discover? So with that in mind, listen to this thought. A promise is an obligation that someone picks up or puts themselves under. Such a promise assumes and requires integrity. The person trusted must have both the character to keep the promise and the competence to be able to do so. In that sense, covenant is essentially an exchange of promises. Two or more parties agree to be bound by a certain undertaking, pledging themselves to each other in an open-ended relationship of mutual care. And this is one of the best definitions of covenant that I know. Covenant is therefore promise-keeping and trust writ large and made lasting. It is the trust that underlies all healthy families and good relationships, now expanded to become the foundation of an entire society and even a nation. A covenant is a commitment that makes life worth living and enables life to be lived well. It is a word of honor given at a point in time that binds together past, present, and future, making possible lasting love, enduring freedom, flourishing lives, and healthy community. So how important is trust? And this is, you could just write this on a coffee mug and read it every morning. Just listen to this. Trust starts with integrity. Trust continues only with integrity. And trust lasts only as long as there is integrity. Okay, let me read it again. Trust starts from integrity. Trust continues only with integrity. And trust lasts only as long as there is integrity. The link between trust and integrity is insoluble. So much so that Rabbi Heschel can write stunningly, "The person in whom I trust is present in my trust." Covenant is therefore nothing less than the enlargement of that promise-keeping and that trust to a community at a national level here from Sinai as we're reading. So long as the covenantal promise-keeping is maintained from the top of society to the bottom, and the integrity of the individual and all others can rely upon one another, solidarity of community not only happens, but it thrives. So if we want to see as people, that's all I'm reading, thank the Lord, Jonathan, you're in scholar mode, you're at the university, kind of, but you have to hear all this, because this is the magnitude of what we have. Think of what's going to happen to Moses, to the people individually, to the people collectively. Where does the relationship break down? It breaks down with integrity, it breaks down with trust, and we would say, well, it breaks down from obedience. Well, obedience is a hard form of an English word we use that's like, you better comply. Like, think of your kids. You better do what I'm telling you to. Well, that's a form that we in Western thought have put together. What does this mean in the Old Testament and the Decalogue? Well, let's look at verses 3 through 6. And this is chapter 20. And you might be like, this guy is not going to pull this off. He is. Let's go. So, verse number 3, which we know this passage, we read it last week. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourselves an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water underneath. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. And I'm citing, by the way, you're like, gosh, you must be in, your doctoral studies are rubbing off. They are, because I'm citing a bunch of sources today. But I've also listed what I'm referring to on the bottom of the back page. If you all want to, and these are not big books, these are like smaller commentary style books. So Tony Merida, who I've read and used in school quite a lot, he says, and this we know, the 10 words is what the Greek is calling the Decalogue. The 10 words can be divided into 2 groups. First, the love of God, which is the first 4. Second, the love of people, which is the second, or the last 6. So one's vertical oriented, beginning with this one today, and then the next 3. And then the last 6 commandments are horizontal to others. God says that we should have no other gods before Him. Well, what does that mean? If God is God, He is infinite, eternal, and sovereign, and cannot share the throne with another being. And he doesn't. He won't do that. So with God, it's somewhat of a take it or leave it proposition. But as I'm going to work into, because how many of you have this question? Because I've had this question as I study Scripture pretty often. God loves me because He decided to do that. Am I worthy of His love? Not on my own, I'm not. So if He's worthy and He loves me, why does He want me to be in relationship with Him? That's a good question. Why does God command His people to listen, pay attention to, and respond to these 10 commandments? Because again, and I'm just, maybe it's because I'm real logical, I'm not optimistic or pessimistic, I'm very realistic in the way I think. If God doesn't ultimately need me, because does He? Does God need us? Okay, whoa, let's pause just a second. There's groups out there that would say the only way God's going to get anything done is if He uses us, so we're really important in this process. Well, the Scripture teaches us of our importance in relation to God. Because if we build in righteousness for ourselves, we're misinterpreting what this says. Because it doesn't say God commanded these things to the people because they would need Moses' help to obey them. No, Moses was not going to have an easy time attempting to obey these either. So, worshiping God truly and only, even in a way that God is no, and I'm saying this very broadly, if we worship God today, is God any different? No. If we don't worship God today, is God any different? No. So here's what I'm saying. We have no leverage point on God whatsoever. Does God respond to humanity? I just read the Scripture. What does God do? To those who hate Him, He will act. To those who love Him, He will act. This is by His volition, His discretion. So there's no negotiation on our part. Wiersbe would say, God is one and true, and God is different than anything else. Remember last week I said God is otherness. God has bid us to come and know Him. Because God has decided that, we can come and know Him. But only because of that. Not because of anything that no smarts on our part, there's no, I guess say it in a real simple way, there's no naturally native good things within us that is going to parallel itself to God. That's why we can't worship each other or anything we've done or anything we would do, even altogether. It's not the same thing. And we can worship those things, and people have. But think of think of the comparison of worshiping the true God and worshiping false gods. And this is a great quote from Wiersbe's commentary. The worship of the pagan nations, and in a certain way, the paganness of people, which is even alive in America today or any part of the world at any point in history, not only is illogical, but it's unbiblical. It is intensely immoral. What happens when we begin to worship things that aren't God? Well, temple prostitutes show up, fertility rites show up, inhumane things happen, sacrificing of children. Rusty mentioned this in the sermon last week. Demonic influences. There, the people worship those things. Are they unexplainable and powerful? Oh, this is so magnificent. In fact, was that what was happening in Egypt under Pharaoh? I think so. Is it going to happen in the future? Well, the Antichrist coming. I think the Bible tells us it will. So there's no wonder God wants Israel to destroy the temples, altars, and idols of the pagans. But God's not just dealing with some external threat of some other belief set. What's God dealing with? The heart of the people, as we're going to see. So the Decalogue, on purpose, I only have 2 quotes from Budzuski. But we just have like a whole class from his writing. It's not as important as the Bible, but listen to this. The natural law is one that applies to everyone, and at some level is known by everyone. Okay, the glass is getting full. I'm looking at your eyes. The glass is getting full. But listen to what I'm saying. God has made himself known to all. True? And we all worship something. Now this is real base level. If we all worship something and God's made himself known to all, and he's also made laws that are moral, that require even faith and action, that everyone knows at some level we will all be judged on this. Here's what Budzuski says, and it's right. And he writes chapters on this in his book, so I'm just being at the top, the very top of the top view. We're like kind of looking at the airplane. I'm not getting any of the trees in the forest. We're looking at the big picture. Natural law looks at the universal moral code written on the heart and agrees with the 10 Commandments or Decalogue in a very literal sense. Thomas Aquinas would be a huge proponent of natural law, and we could study him, but he synthesizes natural law, saying revelation and natural law aren't competing. They're actually illuminating one another because they both stem from God. So the first commandment, love the Lord your God, and basically love and worship him only, is very exclusive. It means that only God can and should be worshipped in the most correct way. So you could say anything else that's important to us, equal or greater to God, is not worthy of what we're giving it to. We're not, of our worship or our attention focus or our drive. But to know only God and worship only God presupposes a knowledge of God. That makes sense? So God says, have no other gods before me. What does that presuppose? That you could worship God alone, and that you could know God, right? And what else? And there's some principles of justice, and he goes much further. We have 2 judges in the Sunday school class that could go further than me explaining this. The principle of justice including gratitude. So true response to God's provision of the rule. So is the rule meant for good? To worship God and only God? Yeah. Is the rule or the commandment given, does it also respond to justice and give each what is due to him or her? Right. Like, to make it real simple, if we worship God and God alone, is there some effect or consequence of that? Yes. If we don't, is there a consequence of that? Unavoidable. Who wants to really think with me this morning about this deeply and how we live? Yeah, I do. So think with me here. I have a choice. You have a choice. Do you and I know God? I don't even have to contemplate that. God says that he's made himself known. I believe that's the case. Do some people know God more than other people know God? In the most general revelation sense, I do think so. But hey, and this attacks us just about the way it's going to attack Israel in the next 20 some odd chapters of Exodus. God's revealed himself to us. Now, before you answer, Does that make it easier or harder for us? Oh, I think this makes it a lot easier and a lot harder. Because then it's not God's demonstration to all, it's God's demonstration to those who are in agreement with Him. So making an agreement with God is something He desires, He initiates. But what is it bumping against? And I think I can finish in 13 minutes. I see you're hold with me to the end. So one thing He says is don't have idols. Well, what are idols? And there's much that can be said here. Simply, MacArthur says the first commandment's the most detailed. It's also how many of us have violated this commandment? Well, go ahead and raise your hand. How many of us have have no other gods before it? Well, we've all violated that one. Well, how do I know that? Because we were all born into sin, and we all did sin, and we all lived against God. If you're like, well, I haven't, you don't understand what I'm teaching you. Because I'm saying that we all have. And who knows that? Well, we kind of know it at a certain level, but God knows it at the most complete level. And He has still come to Moses and come to Israel, and He knows who they are, and He's called upon them to worship Him alone. So Meredith is going to say the first commandment does away with atheism. Now, there's a lot we can talk about right there. What he's saying is there's no room for anyone to say there is no God. Because intuitively, what do we know? There's a creator. In fact, a lot of books on apologetics are going to say this too. Truth Project is going to say it too. We can't live in a way like there is no God. We can't live that way. And some people would say, well, I can do it. I can take all morality and all ethic away. There is no such thing. You can't live that way. Because if you said that, guess what you could do to that person right off? Well, you could just destroy them. Well, what consequence is there? There is no good. There is no evil. No, but there is. Because our conscience at first is going to stop us. But then guess what the rest of humanity is going to do? They're going to respond. You can see this with children. You can see it with people. No one's fine with someone being beaten to death, raped, murdered. I mean, no one's okay with that. The person that's like, well, it really doesn't matter. Well, if it's happening to you, and if you were to say it's happening to me and it doesn't matter, you have now totally denied like the most fundamental thing. So why then do we worship idols? This is within the human heart. Well, idols can be many things. One, and the Truth Project is almost predicated upon this question, do we believe that what we believe is really real? If you're worshiping an idol, do you want to believe that that's what it is? That's maybe step one. If you're, and I won't wander into movies, but there are some movies that deal with existence and reality. And part of the issue with some of those is where people say, well, I know this isn't real, and I know this isn't right, but it's just what I'm going to do. This is not an okay place to be in, and God's calling Israel not to be in that place. He's calling them to a place of knowledge, action, and response that is called worshiping. And so worshiping God is singular. Worshiping everything else is the wrong answer, or is idolatry. So we're exchanging, this is what Paul would say in Romans 1, and there's other verses that we could look at too. Why do we, as the creature, exchange fellowship with the God Creator who desires to be in relationship with us? Why do we exchange that basically for a lie, for corruption, for ignorance, for foolishness, basically? And by the way, and this is why this next point is in the lesson, you might say, well, Jonathan, this first commandment really sounds like this is about God and worshiping God. Right, you're trending correctly with me. That's right. But the Bible, who's the main character of the entire Bible? Well, it's humanity, Jonathan, and then Jesus becomes a human, and so it's about humanity. No. Every lesson I'm teaching on these 10 commandments, we should ask the question, what am I being taught? And what is this revealing to me of God? Because this book is written about God. Like this is not, and you say, well, Jonathan, it's very instructive for the church and how the church should operate. We're about to get into about 20 chapters on how the sacrificial system should work, how the tabernacle should be, all that, and you're like, oh my goodness, is this still about God? Exactly, yes. And as we think about God, when he says, have no other gods before me, and man, this may be the most important point of the whole lesson, so like follow me here. What does it teach us about God? Well, Meredith, again, is going to remind us, the first commandment, if we say it instead of negatively, because sometimes, I don't know if you were like me when I was a little kid, it's almost intimidating. You shall have no other gods before me. I can just picture God being way up on something talking down at someone. But like Meredith turns it to a positive statement, which I think is a little bit different for us to see, but the same thing. God is saying in a positive way, I shall be your only God. That's powerful because it teaches us that God's jealous and he won't share his glory with another. Now you might say, well, why should I be concerned with how God is toward me? I can't figure that out. I struggle with even knowing who I am. Well, I struggle with knowing who I am too. But listen to the point here of God and his jealousy. Because is jealousy a good... does the Bible teach us as people to be jealous?
People know.
People know. In fact, the New Testament especially. What should we set aside? Anger, wrath, jealousy. Jealousy? I thought I was supposed to be like God, and it says God is jealous here. What is going on? Well, with God, there is no wrong. In God's anger, he never sins. In God's wrath, he never exceeds the line of being just. So here, when we think about the connection or the connotation of jealousy, why is God jealous? He's not going to share. So okay, as people, and I don't have time to get into all this like on the sociology or psychology of it, as people we shouldn't be jealous because we'll overreact to one another and we'll end up hurting, killing, destroying each other. That's what will happen with us. Yeah. And I won't go into some stories of illustration. I'll say this real quick. And Susan's over in the nursery, so she's not here. She'd be laughing if she heard me telling this story. She's probably over there helping one of the children laughing. So I remember at prom, right? So some guys, she grew up in a small town, high school, and I grew up in Houston. So I get to the prom with Susan, and we're both in public school. Well, the guy she was friends with are giving her a hug, and I'm like, you seen a rooster that like bows up? I'm like, wait a minute, who are you, right? And so it's like, think of rooster squaring off in the chicken coop, right? The pen. Y'all know what I'm talking about. So what's happening there? I'm trying to be protective and jealous, and this is a teenager. You know what I'm saying? Is this what God does toward Israel? Hey, these are my people. Like, I'm going to take you out. Well, not in the silliness of humanity. With God's perspective, which is not the same, but here's how severe this is. The only other places, and I've looked at a couple commentaries on this third point under jealous God. The only ones I could find, and this is in the Greek, it's a weird phrasing. The connotation in the Greek is, this is what happens when a person that's married to one wife, while they're still alive, breaches that and takes on another wife. Not okay. Why? Because the exclusive relationship has now been fractured, and this is the description of the jealous God. So if Israel's joined to God, and then they join themselves with these foreign gods, or, and you might say, well, is that the only violation? Oh, I think it's much worse than joining some foreign belief. Within their heart, they commit adultery toward God, right? They've gone a whoring, as the prophets are going to say. This is not okay. Yeah. So physically going a whoring, that's not okay. Physically, if you're doing that, you're joining yourself to other people. What does the Bible tell us about that? Sexual sin destroys the person. You don't want to do that. Well, what about in your beliefs or in your heart or in your mind? Right. That departure, the point of jealousy, God's not going to be okay with that arrangement. He's not going to join himself. The Holy God's not going to join himself to anything else. Because the glory that he desires and even commands is because of his nature, what he's done, and he will not share. And in that way, God is uniquely worthy and alone unique of any and everything. So you might say, and I've read people that do this, and it's people that don't understand. Sometimes in apologetics or debate, people that are against Christianity or against God or don't understand, they make God out to be this one that's going to come in with Israel and kill women and children and animals, and God's just violent. He's going to destroy. This is the violence of religion, and it's still in war. And I'm like, whoa, calm down. Hold on a second. The God of Scripture is not necessarily doing that, and certainly not in the way you think. So listen to Budzinski's quotation in the conclusion, and this points to it. If everything, and I'm paraphrasing it before I read it to you, if everything belongs to God, including all humanity, who can tell God what he can and can't do with humanity? Or what he can and cannot command of humanity? And who else can do that? We can't do it as people. People try that. Dictators try to command others to do things. And in the heart, does that work out? We can talk after class. If you know of a person or group of people that can command authority, love and respect, and worship and responsibility the way God can, come talk to me about it. I'll show you that they can. They might can physically, like, you do this or I'll kill you, and people respond and they're like, look at all my power. This is not what God's attempting. God's attempting it from the inside versus the outside. So Budzinski is going to say, the first commandment, love the Lord your God, and worship and love no other. This means that we owe God, what we owe God is loyalty and worship and obedience. So let me pause. We owe that to God. And you might say, well, Jonathan, I disagree. This is not my